Hello everyone, Little Fair, and welcome to the Week 1 episode for the Heist in 3.12 Challenge League. For viewers that prefer an audio-only version of the Chaos Report, you'll be able to find it immediately over on my Patreon, as per usual. Of course, that one remains a free option, even though the text-written version is now over on Poe-Vault, which you can now find immediately as well. It will be linked in the description down below. One additional quick reminder, you can also find the timestamps to each section in the pinned comment down below, and also on the timeline for the video itself. Do keep in mind that this entire video is based on educated guesses or predictions, and as such, it might not be entirely accurate. Furthermore, I might miss a thing or two that seem obvious to many, and for that I apologize. It's hard to cover everything. If I do miss something that you think is important, leave it in the comments down below. Well, that means, of course, it's invest at your own risk. With the usual disclaimer out of the way, let's jump right into this one. The first segment breaks down currencies and commodities such as influence exalted orbs and fragments. We'll be taking a look at how they have been performing over the past week, and taking a rough look at how they will likely continue to proceed in this following one. Exalted Orbs are first, as per usual, of course. The OG Exalted Orb has seen its lowest price point ever during the first week of the Challenge League's release. They're currently sitting at around 80 chaos, and have been there for about the entire last week, with a few fluctuations up and down by 5 to 10 chaos at most. This is extremely uncommon behavior for the OG orbs, as they normally shoot up drastically in the first week, only to reach a plateau and then continue their rise a week later. It is very rare that the OG Exalts reach a plateau for such a long time, especially this low of a plateau and this early on in the league. There are a few reasons this might be the case, but figuring out exactly what causes Exalted Orb prices to be the way that they are is, of course, impossible. Primarily, the league mechanics seems to have a major impact on OG Exalted Orb prices most of the time. Whenever a league mechanic provides a large amount of basic currency, such as Chaos Orbs, Regal Orbs, etc., the Exalted Orbs respond by being more expensive, relatively to other leagues. While this is somewhat of a case in Heist, we've seen one major difference comparatively to other leagues that provided a similar assortment of loot. The currency chests in Heist provide Exalted Shards. This has not really been the case in previous leagues such as Legion, which popularized the loot icon-based reward chests, Blight or similar. Usually the currency chests would only provide a heap of Chaos Orbs and Regal Orbs and other tier 2 or tier 3 currency, with a rare tier 1 here or there as mostly Divine or Annulment Orbs. With Heist, however, it is fairly common to get 1 to 3 Exalted Shards in your currency reward chests, comparatively to the normal amount of Exalted Shards you'd normally receive in any particular league, and as such, drastically rises the amount of Exalted Orbs available in the economy as a whole. A lot of players are also focusing their Heist trinkets on Exalted Orbs specifically, which further increases the supply, if even just a tiny little amount. As Harvest no longer exists and crafting has returned to a more gambling-oriented version of itself rather than deterministic crafting from the last league, we've also seen way less usage for the Exalted Orbs overall, as most players simply decide to buy their items from one another, rather than spend Exalts themselves trying to metacraft or use the expensive top-tier crafts on the crafting bench in general. One last factor that likely is one of the main parts that play into the Exalt pricing is that the Chaos Orb itself has a vastly increased value, comparative to pretty much any other league before. Comparing previous league prices with this one, we see that the overall Chaos Orb equivalent prices for items have drastically decreased, resulting in the Chaos Orb having substantially more buying power on a per orb basis than is usual. This could be caused by the extremely high amount of added items that require Chaos Orbs for rerolls, such as Contracts, Blueprints, Rogue Gear, and the new item base types, which have raised the demand for Chaos Orbs disproportionately to the overall supply, resulting in higher buying power overall. It could also be a side effect of GGG clamping down harder on bots, by adding a few more roadblocks for them. While there are still a ton of bots, slight changes have had to be made to adjust to GGG's new bot detection and prevention mechanics that seem to have taken effect at the start of the Heist. I thought this made as large of an impact as we're seeing in the current Exalt and Chaos Orb prices respectively, but I would imagine it at least plays a part in the overall supply of Chaos Orbs, leading to a decrease in set supply as a whole. Overall, it is extremely difficult to predict the Exalt prices for this league, as it is following no known price graph or any previous league even remotely. Going by my gut feeling, I would argue that they're likely going to increase as the league progresses. We'll most certainly see a spike in the prices over the next coming week, simply due to more and more players requiring Exalts for trading, as they want to finish up their first league starter builds and will try to acquire their more expensive items from others. I would highly recommend keeping a close eye on the OG Exalted Orbs, as its market is extremely interesting to follow in this league in particular. It could shoot up at pretty much any moment, as nothing is really holding it back from being easily manipulated by a group of players, or to get vastly inflated by a meta shift. As for the Influence Exalted Orbs and the Awaken Orb, let's take a look. The Hunter's Exalted Orb has seen a rather steady curve, similar to that of the OG Exalt. During the first week of the leak, it has been holding a solid price point of around 180 chaos, but has been dipping in the past 24 to 48 hours to a roughly 150 chaos price point, which is closer to its sale price, which has been hovering around 120 chaos so far. Similar to the OG Orb, it has been affected very heavily by the removal of the Harvest crafting, and as a result, lost a lot of its comparative value in this league. While we originally predicted a price increase of the floor by about 100 to 150 chaos, with the current OG Exalt prices and the buying power of Chaos Orbs as a whole, this is highly unlikely. I would expect the Hunter Orb to stick roughly around the price point, that about 2 times as much as the OG Exalt for the foreseeable future. As such, keep an eye on both of these orbs to get a rough idea for the respective pricings. The Awakener Orb is also seen as lowest week 1 price of all time. While only introduced to the game in Metamorph, this has historically been the most expensive Influence Orb by far. With all the crazy happenings this league, however, we've seen the Awakener Orb sit more around the prices of the other Influence Orbs, especially the Warlord's one. The current prices sit around 160 chaos momentarily, as they're moving closer to the 150 chaos mark. They'll likely remain here for a while, or at least bottom out, before potentially rising up again as a result of more players getting done with their first characters and deciding to opt for in-game items. As always, if you require a rundown on how the Awakener Orb mechanics function, feel free to check out the Metamorph Week 3 episode of the Chaos Report. I cover the crafting mechanics of the orb in a fairly in-depth manner, and also link to further reading and video material in the description of that video. The Crusader's Exalted Orb has already had its drop over the past couple of days and is now adjusting towards the 150 chaos price point as well. The orb is currently sitting at around 130 to 40 chaos, with a definite incline towards a further rise towards the 150 chaos mark as mentioned. Why exactly all the influence orbs are racing towards that 150 chaos mark is hard to say. The meta does not indicate any potential raises or declines, and neither the demand nor the supply for any of the orbs, so they're still trending towards that price point. It might simply be that the 150 chaos mark is considered the price floor for many of these rather rare orbs, so the market is naturally adjusting towards those prices. Alternatively, there might be a group of people trying to force prices towards that point. As the overall supply of these influence orbs is very small, it usually is very easy to manipulate as well. After having checked the markets for each of the influence orbs, however, this does not seem to be the case. As a result, I would still advise some caution when trading with influence orbs, as their pricing graphs are highly suspicious and impossible to properly predict at the current moment in time. The Warlord's Exalted Orb has been giving the Awakener Orb a run for its money this past week. This is not an unusual sight to see, as many players use the Warlord's influence for their starter builds, while very few League starters even consider the Awakener Orb in their setups. It is fairly common for the Warlord's Exalted Orb to outprice the Awakener during the first week. The odd part is that the Awakener Orb normally rapidly outpaces the Warlord's by the end of the first week. This time, however, the Warlord's Orb is gaining steam and slowly increasing its price above the 165 chaos mark, while the Awakener Orb is trending down towards the 150 chaos area. As with the previous influence orbs, it is nearly impossible to make any predictions on this one as well. But I would expect it to continue its slight rise, as it just came out of the recession for the last couple of days, and the softcore market usually responds to that with the increase in prices, once the specific currency recovers. And lastly, the Redeemer's Exalted Orb. The Redeemer Orb seems to have is the only one following any actual logic or reason, and is currently sitting at around 95 chaos, with a slight inclination towards the 100 chaos area. As with every league since Metamorph's introduction of this orb, it is only slightly ahead of the OG Exalt in terms of its pricing. The mod influence pool is still fairly subpar compared to the other orbs, which results in its continuously low prices. It is unlikely that this orb will gain a lot of distance on the OG Exalts in terms of prices, so expect it to stick around roughly 20 to 30 chaos around its prices at all times. If the OG Exalt increases, so will this one. If it decreases, so will the Redeemer Orb. Pay attention to potential market manipulation if you see this orb suddenly shoot out of their price range, as it would highly suspicious market movement. As always, if you intend on buying any of these orbs just covered, make sure you keep an eye on this extremely volatile market space, and buy the ones that you think are worth the most. Alteration orbs have also seen a fairly strong start into this new league. Despite the incredible buying power of Chaos orbs overall, Alteration orbs have managed to climb to a respectable 5-to-1 price point. While the current league peak has already passed a few days ago at a roughly 4.5-to-1 ratio, and they're currently falling in prices, it is highly unlikely that these will drop in prices by a large amount. With the removal of Harvest Crafting, the Alteration and Regal method is back as being one of the only halfway deterministic crafting options in the game. Additionally, with the reintroduction of synthesized and fractured item bases thanks to the Heist loot pool, they also gained a lot of value, as many players will want to guarantee a couple of great rolls on those bases for their characters. Heist League does not seem to have drastically increased the supply for these orbs, which seems fairly surprising, considering the abundance of rare items dropped in the actual heists themselves. It seems that either more of them are being used than usual, or that people simply skip by all the rare items of the league despite their increased potential. It is going to be interesting to keep an eye on the overall alteration orb numbers in the league, just to see how it progresses over the course of it. I hope many of you took my start of league advice to heart and bought up a ton while they were still at 15:1 ratio or better, as I don't expect them to fall below the 6:1 ratio again for the remainder of the league, barring unforeseen circumstances such as a patch or a drastic meta shift to full unique item builds, of course. Now, for the commodity section, we'll be covering the different fragment pieces, as well as the synthesis and guardian map drops. Shaper fragments have seen a fairly similar price graph to last league. Comparatively to Harvest, the prices are of course going to be lower, as the overall buying power of Chaos Orbs has risen drastically. But comparing the fragments to Exalted Orb prices in the same league will show that the sets are at roughly their usual rate, equal to about 50 to 60% of the OG Exalted Orb. This would be about 50 Chaos for each set at the current moment. As predicted during the last episode, we've seen a major increase in prices for the Dying Sun, as many of the new abilities are projectile or area of effect based and scale extremely well with the additional benefits provided by the flask. While I would have expected a slight rise, it is also not surprising to see no changes at all, simply due to the fact that it's only a singular item in the pool which has risen to prominence. Overall, I would currently advise to run your Shapers, as the Ubuilder fragments will make up about 90% of the entire price, and you have a shot at the jackpot price of the Undying Sun and the Starforge, which is still in its early league rarity status, meaning it's worth a couple of X-Folds at the very least. The Ubuilder fragments have, similarly to the Shaper one, seen no real changes in its relative pricing compared to last league. They're currently at a roughly 120 Chaos price point for the entire set, which comes out to roughly 140% of the OG Exalt prices at the current time. While last league the prices were closer to a 110 or 120% ratio, they are not nearly as high as they used to be during Delirium League or any other similar leagues, which averaged out to roughly 200 to 230% ratio. This leads me to assume that the overall meta does not heavily value the overall rewards of the Uberworld they encounter in the current league, but that more players are interested at them in general than during Harvest. It is likely caused by the increased reliance on unique items yet again, as the player base no longer has access to easy gearing without the crafting mechanics provided by the last league mechanic. My advice would be to run your Uber Elders at the moment. Many of the unique items dropped by them, especially the Eternity Shroud and the Watcher's Eye, are extremely worthwhile at the beginning of each league, and this one's no different. For roughly 1 Exalt entry price, you can easily run 8 or 9 of them before you need to get a singular one of these drops to break even. If you're luckier than that, you'll nearly always make a profit. Now, the Elder Fragments have continued their last league dominance over their Shaper brothers. Despite being the technically easier to acquire fragments, they've once again beaten the Shaper fragments in terms of pricing, even if slightly. The entire set will run you around 60 to 70 Chaos at the current moment. This is likely caused by the always popular Impresence, especially the Chaos variant for this league, being a league start favorite for many builds. Additionally, with the Watcher's Eye always providing the lucky potential jackpot, the Elder Fragments rarely lose their value throughout the leagues. The best item you can currently get from the boss fight will likely be the Chaos Impresence. It runs at around 4 to 5 Exalts at the current moment. For Watcher's Eyes, the best advice is to sell them unidentified. You can usually sell it for a few Exalted Orbs and let someone else identify it for you. That way you get a guaranteed cash out rather than identifying a terrible eye, which is what happens most of the time anyway, let's be real. Right now I'd advise running them yourself, as they're fairly cheap and have a high potential for profit, as the Chaos Impresence is considered one of the more common drops, and the Watcher's Eye will make sure you don't lose out on too much profit with continuous runs. Lastly, the Synthesis unique maps have stuck around their relative last league prices point as predicted. No big changes have been happening here, with most of the Herald Rings still being moderately suboptimal choices for many builds since the nerfs, and all the drops being mostly irrelevant. Their prices currently range from 20 to 26 Chaos. Expect them to rise and fall together with the overall Chaos Orb purchasing power, if there happens to be a change in it at all this league. The Cortex has also continued its usual price graph at the 1.6x value. Its prices will of course increase and decrease together with the OG Exalt graph, as the Cortex is one of the items that are permanently in demand and priced as Exalts rather than a certain value of Chaos Orbs. One interesting aspect that was added in this dynamic, however, is the replica Cortex map provided by the Grand Heists. This one is seeing prices many times higher than the Cortex due to its unique drop, the replica Nebulous, being extremely popular for deep delving builds. I would highly advise selling your replica Cortexes if you stumble upon one, as it's fairly unlikely you will break even by running them yourself. Now, with those currencies and commodities covered, let's move on to your unique item watch list. While many of the items I recommend last week did not pan out, others very much did. Let's take a quick look at the survivors of last week's predictions. First up on our list, the Impulse's Broken Heart. While they have already fallen down to a roughly 15 chaos price point, their early league start was extremely high due to many players opting to try out the new Crackling Lance ability. The downfall of the prices are directly correlating to Crackling Lance being a large disappointment for a sizable chunk of the player base. It is unlikely that the Impulse will see a resurgence, but 6-link variants of it are still worthwhile and will likely keep their value for quite some time. Barring any unforeseen changes to this, we will not be taking another look at them next week, but I figured it would be fitting to tell everyone that the Impulse is still going strong for the league start, as one of the real older chess pieces that everyone used to love for nearly every build. The Surrender Unique Shield is up next on the list. As per usual, the best unique shield in the game is going extremely strong in this one again, especially with the nerf to Glancing Blows Keystone, making it mandatory to carry a life gain on block shield if you intend on using the Keystone. This shield has seen a major increase in popularity. Its early league prices are comparative to the prices seen in Harvest League, being nearly a 10 times factor of the OG Exalt. Especially popular for Gladiator, Cyclones, and Lacerate builds, this shield will likely remain a staple throughout the entire league and provide us with a grand opportunity for some great profit. For some reason, a lot of players seem to forget that this unique is very easily farmable by running your Ornithol Breachstones of any variety. The basic Breachstone itself is only about 29 chaos, while the potential rewards, the Anticipation, and subsequently the Surrender, are as high as 700 chaos. That means you can easily run 20 plus Breachstones dry without running the red, if you simply drop one of those on your next few runs. If you drop 2 back to back, you're basically set for the remainder of the league at the current Breachstone prices. For this one, I heavily advise farming the Breachstone, as the current prices are ridiculously low for the potential rewards provided by them. Now, to cut things short with the unique item watchlist here, to make room for the lengthy discussion segment of today's episode, I'll not be including any new uniques, but I recommend for you to keep an eye on the Chevron's Wrappings, the Brass Dome, the Devouring Diadem, the Snake Pit, and the Primordial Jewels in general. Now, moving on to a third segment for this video, the meta analysis. This league has provided us with one of the most diverse metas to date. The current ladder sports about a 50% play rate for the 4 most played ascendancies, with none of them exceeding the 20% play rate mark. More impressively, however, is that the overall usage of main link gems is extremely diverse. Not a singular ability on the ladder currently reaches the 10% play mark rate, which is unbelievably exciting for somebody that has to look at these graphs every week for years now. Usually, and especially this early on in a league, we see a large percentage of the player base opt for a singular, agreed upon, easy mode playstyle, such as a cookie cutter summoner, miner, or cyclone build. This time around, however, we see a large diversity ranging from Blade Vortex casters to Carrion Golem summoners over Cyclone memers to Essence Drain tricksters and even Glacial Cascade miners. The only archetype not represented on the ladder is our good old friends the bow builds. Outside of the low 2% play rate is Bleed Blow Gladiators, the archetype is still not recovered from its last rework. While some of the most played abilities on the ladder do indeed use bows, such as Toxic Ray and Caustic Arrow, they're generally more regarded as spells, let's be entirely honest, since they mainly scale by virtue of the skill gem itself, rather than the overall physical or elemental damage provided by the chosen weapon. It has been a while since we've seen things such as Tornado Shot, Galvanic Arrow, or even Ice Shot to truly make up a sizable chunk of the player base. Originally, I had anticipated this to change with the Pinpoint support gem, as its reveal painted it as the perfect support gem for a lot of lesser supported abilities in the game, such as the new Steel ability, Spectral Throw, or, of course, 90% of the bow abilities. However, those dreams were crushed by the actual gem and information thread, as it became apparent that the support gem was once again gated behind the spell's keyword, and eternally dooming the bow archetype and all those abilities listed to remain in support gem and scaling nirvana, where they've been for quite some time. One can only hope that GGG will take a look at those problems in future leagues. Now, as for this league's future meta, I would expect it to continue being fairly versatile, my apologies. While some content creators can impact the diversity on the ladder quite drastically, with the amount of potential new builds existing in Heist League thanks to the alternative quality gems, the replica uniques, and its non-gating league mechanic, I'd imagine most of them to choose different builds from one another, further spreading the community and creating a more diverse ladder over the course of the league. As for the Atlas analysis, nothing changed. I'm likely not going to be taking out this section in future episodes, as with the reworking of the Atlas mechanic and Metamorphs expansion, there's not really been much change to the overall strategies that are employed for the Atlas as a whole. While there's slight alterations here or there, it is not as important to convey those on a weekly basis, and will likely only be covered as a discussion segment from here on out. So say goodbye to the Atlas analysis section. Bye-bye! With the Mala analysis finished, let's move on to to the strategy and discussion segment. As is tradition, I'll give you a quick rundown of the league mechanic in this first episode to make sure everyone understands and is able to engage in the league mechanic itself. Of course, it won't just simply be a rundown, I'll also include tips and tricks, advice, and my personal opinion on the current state of the league itself. So sit back and relax. If this short rundown is too quick for you, or you'd like to read more on the league mechanics and more in-depth explanations, I'll be linking to my written guide on the league mechanic in the description down below. Now, let's get into it. Heist League is one of the largest leagues we've ever gotten, in terms of added content. With a ton of alternative quality gems, a giant amount of entirely new and really powerful base types, weapon and armor enchants, and around 100 replica uniques, it is absolutely stacked full of potential for awesome builds, fun exploration, exploitation, and most importantly, potential profit. In the Heist League, you take control over a band of rogues and go on a heist to accrue yourself enough experience and rogue markers to land the big jackpots in the grand heists. The general gameplay loop revolves around running a couple dozen heists to get yourself the necessary currency to attempt a grand heist, which will grant you all the interesting loot mentioned earlier. There's 9 rogue companions to continue the list, and each come with their own perks and abilities. While the perks are unique to each person, the abilities are not. There's always at least 2 rogues that share any one of their abilities, the big difference being their maximum level, as there's only ever one rogue with the capability to reach level 5 in any given ability. Take for example Karst and Huck. While both feature the lockpicking ability, Huck is limited by only being able to reach a maximum of level 3, while Karst can go all the way up to the hard cap of level 5, allowing Karst to take on the hardest heists and grand heist, while Huck gets left behind. Every rogue usually has one primary ability, in which they are the best at. The only exception for this rule is Vinderi, who is the best at both demolition and trap disarmament, being able to reach both at level 5. During the heists, you'll find small chests and bigger chests, which are hidden inside of secret rooms that can only be opened by a rogue companion. The big chests will have a clear indication for the reward type, while the small ones that are strewn around the heist itself will be entirely random in terms of rewards. For what ability corresponds to which reward type on the large chest, please refer to the cheat sheet on the right, and of course this one will be linked in the description down below as well. In order to use this cheat sheet, simply take a look at your contracts or blueprints and check for the requirements section. Whatever ability is listed there is the one you want to refer to on the cheat sheet, as those will be the available reward types for the secret rooms in that particular heist. Now, once inside the heist, things should be fairly simple to understand. Open as many small and big chests as you want well below the alert level, get to the artifact, and then rush out as fast as possible. One important thing to remember, the higher your alert level is, when the lockdown begins, the more enemies will spawn. This will substantially increase the difficulty you face in getting out of the heist, the higher the alert level is. So if you're not sure if your build can handle all the mobs while escaping, consider opening a few less chests than you would otherwise intend to. Based on the newest changes to the rewards, I would recommend focusing primarily on lockpicking, demolition, agility, and deception if your main goal is to make raw currency. Especially the last 3 have very long animations and annoying bugs that accompany them, but the reward types in my experience have yielded the greatest potential payout in raw currency compared to all the other ones. When it gets to the rogue equipment, I would highly recommend focusing the gear on each rogue's particular primary ability. One example with Karst. As he is the only level 5 lockpicking character, I would recommend focusing his items, and especially his trinket slot, around the currency and fragments chests, as those will be the ones he has the most access to whenever you take him out on a heist. Aim for at least 2 beneficial mods on the trinket slot for him. It is absolutely worth it to spend a couple of chaos orbs rerolling the bad ones. You should buy an eye level 83 plus foliate brooch for all of your rogues, as eye level 83 plus is required for the tier 1 mods. I would advise against trying to heavily invest in rolling them below that eye level, as you'll want to replace them later on with their tier 1 variants anyway. For Karst in this example, the two mods you're looking for are Heist chests have a 13 to 15% chance to duplicate contained currency, as well as a 13 to 15% chance to duplicate contained map fragments. These are both suffixes, which will make it extremely hard to get both of them on a single item, but if you can manage to do so, even if they're not both tier 1, though you definitely want at least one of them at tier 1 at all times, you will really be able to tell the difference in loot drops. Another really amazing option is the 18 to 20% increased time before lockdown prefix modifier on any of its lower tier cousins. This will extend the timer from when the alert starts to when the chests and artifacts become inaccessible. This is something I've been stacking on pretty much all of my characters, and especially Isla benefits from it greatly, due to a high specific perk granting even more of an increase to this timer. Remember that you can still open chests during the lockdown timer. They will simply deduct 1 second from the timer, even if every time you open a chest. With a timer that can easily go into the 60 to 80 seconds range, you can probably figure out what the general idea here is. Stack the lockdown timer bonuses, open everything you can, the lockdown timer begins, you still open everything you can, opening the rest of the chests, causing each one to only deduct 1 second from the extremely generous time pool, and be able to still pick up the artifact and run out. One last tip on the gear, try to avoid the increased rarity and quantity of items dropped in Heist modifier. While normally everyone is excited about these due to the prevalence of magic finding builds in the past, they're absolutely not worth it in Heist, as the majority of the loot comes from the chests themselves, and they don't get affected by player rarity or quantity. As Heist is such a huge league, it is pretty much impossible to cover every single tip and strategy that has been developed for it during its short segment, so I'll hit you with a couple of rapid fire tips at the end here, in order to cover at least a good chunk of them. You can prime secret room chests with the demolition ability. Simply let your demolition expert set up a bomb as per usual, but before he finishes and he can explode it, just run away. This forces him to teleport to you. Once you start the lockdown, you can then return to the room at your leisure, and the chest will be able to explode and open thanks to your previous efforts. That way you can get 1 extra large chest per demolition run, or a couple of small ones. When your rogue gets stuck in a corner or refuses to do their task, simply move far enough away from them to unstuck them, as they'll teleport onto you. Usually this will fix them in 80% of cases. If you happen to get stuck often in the doors or walls of the heist maps, take a smoke mine with you. It seems to be the only ability that can reliably pull you out from the doors and save your heists. When deciding on your own trinkets, avoid mods that grant regal orbs. They're pretty much all a trap. Try to aim for any mod that grants you fusing orbs, however, as they're extremely worthwhile to get, as both chromatics and jeweler drops are very common, especially in the heist currency chests and small chests. Remember that you can simply press the League hotkey, which is defaulted to V, to tell your rogues to open doors of disabled devices. The only things you actively need to click on are the chests for Tibbs and Niles when you're on a lockdown, as they don't seem to respond to the V command during that particular event. That might be a bug, but I'm not entirely sure. When you're inside of a Grand Heist Vault, remember you can always just turn around and leave without picking up any of the curios, if the rewards don't seem that great. It is always better to get out with loot you've already gotten than to risk it all for something you don't even want. With those last few tips on the league mechanic out of the way, my quick personal opinion on the current league. I think it's one of the most fun mechanics we've had for a long time. Unfortunately, it is plagued by horrendous bugs that severely sour the experience. I've always been a fan of league mechanics that, if even a little, require you to think about what you're doing ahead of time. I was a big fan of synthesis, I liked bestiary, had fun in betrayal, and hell, even Blight's tower defense was an interesting twist for a while, in my opinion. Unfortunately, over this past week, the league mechanic has drastically turned for the worse, as GGG has reacted too hastily to a vocal minority's pleading to simplify the league mechanic, and in the worst possible way too. I'm not entirely sure why GGG has decided to act in such an extreme measure, as they usually come up with fairly good ideas to fix the problems presented by the community, but this time around, they honestly really blew it. Ever since they've removed the alert level rising from guards, the league has been either completely free loot or complete snorefest, or both, with no positive traits. With the newest changes to the alert meter, they've returned a tiny bit of the agency to the players, as it is now a slight bit harder to open straight up every single chest, but it doesn't really fix the inherent problem that the league is facing right now. That problem, in my eyes, is a loss of identity. Will require an extensive rework for the league to recover, if it is if it even can, with all the negativity being shared around all the places. For me, I'd like to see them re-add more of a decision matrix in one way or another, but I don't claim to know where GGG is going with this league in any way, so I'm not going to throw out random, unsolicited ideas. Lastly, I'd like to say that I'm absolutely loving the amount of new toys you get to play with, and I would like to urge the community to be a bit patient and enjoy those while the actual league mechanic is in shambles. GGG has never let us down inside of a league when it comes down to making them playable and enjoyable over the course of their patches. While some things will never be perfect, I'm sure we'll be able to enjoy the league in just a few weeks' time, if it even takes that long, considering they've been churning out patches pretty much every few days at this point. Just spend your time with some new builds, explore the new alternative quality gems and replica uniques, or simply take a bit of a break for a week or two if you're unable to deal with the disappointment in this first week of the league. Overall, I see a great amount of potential in the league mechanic. It will take a lot of hard work to get there on GGG's part, but I'm confident we'll have a very enjoyable mechanic by the end of the first month, and I'm greatly looking forward to that point, as the base idea is already very enjoyable to interact with. Now, with the strategy and discussion segment finished, let's move on to the weekly Delve update. As predicted, the Delve mechanic and its accompanying rewards have seen a vast increase in popularity in this first week of the Heist League. Since the removal of Harvest's crafting options, we've returned to a state of somewhat deterministic gambling, with the fossil system as our best bet alongside the alteration and regal method for crafting. Currently at the top of the board are the corroded, bound, sanctified, shuddering, and tangled fossils. They range from 9 chaos down to 7 chaos, representing a fairly steady income base for potential fossil farmers in this league. My current recommendation is to farm the Petrified Forest for fossils specifically, as it can provide 3 out of the 5 fossils mentioned earlier. The current week's prices for the fossils are as follows. Corroded fossils are leading with 9 chaos. Bound fossils are slightly below that at a steady 8 chaos, with a potential rise in the future. Sanctified and shattering fossils share their 7 chaos price point, whereby shuddering fossils are usually easy to acquire. Tangled fossils are at 6 chaos currently, and perfect and enchanted fossils are holding hands at the 4 chaos price point. The rest of the fossils are mostly around the 2 to 3 chaos area, with only the most common ones falling down to the 1 chaos area or below. Happy fossil hunting, and good luck in your delves. Lastly, let's move on to the rapid fire tips and tricks section for this chaos report. Firstly, the chaos recipe. It's fairly uncommon for me to recommend it, as exalted orbs are usually at the 150 chaos price point by now. The chaos orb is still extremely worthwhile in this coming second week of Heist. With the exalted orbs seemingly hitting their ceiling for now at the 80 chaos price point, each hand on the chaos report is roughly equivalent to half of an exalted shard. That's nothing to sneeze at for a lot of you out there, and should not be considered a waste of time, but rather a proper investment in the future of your league. Try it out. It's really not as bad as people make it out to be. Essence Craft Fractured and Synthesized Bases. With the return of the fractured and synthesized bases, we're all asking us this one thing. Why now, when we can't craft them up with the harvest anymore? While we can't quite get to the harvest levels of crafting, you should always remember that your higher level essences are essentially mini harvest crafts, available at a moment's notice. Many of you will likely have an abundance of these essences lying around from the heist mechanic or leveling in general. Simply use your good essence on the right basis with a good fracture or synthesized implicit, and watch the dozens of chaos rain in when you inevitably sell it to another player as it rolls spell modifiers for your melee build. Buy and use scarabs. While many of you are likely heisting your proverbial butts off, don't forget to progress your atlas along the way to make proper use of all the rewards you're getting from the heists. One such reward is scarabs, many of which are currently dirt cheap to insulting degrees, especially ones that provide a large amount of extra currency per map, such as the metamorph scarabs, are as low as 1 chaos each, essentially allowing you to easily run them on every single one of your maps, for guaranteed extra profit. There are a couple of these scarabs at dirt cheap prices, so keep an eye out and use and buy them instead of letting them rot in people's inventories. Lastly, Alva's Temple. As is usual in leagues with new kill or loot mechanics, Alva is seeing a drastically lower engagement range if you can take anything from the unique item numbers available that she provides. As a result, many of her uniques have risen in prices, and especially the end-boss drops such as the vials and the different jewels have gained a fair bit of value over this first week. Especially with the Vial of the Ghost and the Vial of Transcendence, the latter one being used to create the Transcendent Jewels, which are all currently ranging from 1.5 to 2x, with a strong inclination to continue their rise. The TLDR here is run your Alvas. It's free maps and a potential for some decent loot at the end. Now, with those last few tips wrapped up, I'll be ending this chaos report. I hope this video was informative and you learned something from it that you can apply to your own game. Please let me know if I missed anything or you would have wanted me to talk about anything in specific that I might not have covered. If you want to support the creation of these videos, feel free to check out my Patreon and consider signing up for it. I appreciate any and all the support. And of course, don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell thingamajig, like or dislike the video, and check me out over on twitch.tv/LunarWolf. I stream pretty much every day, and I'm always happy to see new faces. If you need background noise during your heists or mapping, I'll gladly be yours. You can find a link to the stream in the description down below. And with that, thanks for watching, and keep farming those exalts.